March 1st, 2025 was a completely insane weekend to kick off this year's tournament circuit. With a record high prize pool of €200, Aringrey's arena makes its mark on Chaos Galaxy history. Today, we're going to be breaking down everything that happened to this event, from heated rivalries to card win rates and usage statistics. Before we get into it though, please consider subscribing to help Chaos Galaxy TCG reach as many new players as possible. If you want to start playing Chaos Galaxy, or just learn a little bit more about the game, there's a link to our Discord server in the description. Give this video a like if you find it interesting, and let's get into the stats. I also want to say a huge thank you to Aringrey as well for putting all this on, putting up so much of his own money out of pocket and giving back to our community in such a grand way. Aringrey was playing all the way back in 2018, so I'm sure this community really has a place in his heart. And we're going to continue to try and make sure it grows and stays just as exciting and passionate as it's been all these years. So first, let's take a look at what decks were most represented among the 11 players that played in this event. Typically at the beginning of new formats, we see a wide variety of decks, and this is no exception. We see almost every player on something a bit different, bar the few people trying out Polysium after the buffs. Everyone is just sort of throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks this tournament, and the representation is incredibly diverse because of it. I imagine these spreads will get a bit more condensed as the meta evolves, but we can see here that Shios Tempo comes out on top this tournament, staying super consistent with Shios draw power to churn through removal and damage, while also utilising Orbit and Guster to capitalise on the lack of zone generation after the ban list. We'll take a closer look at the top 4 deck lists from this tournament in a little bit, but now we can see here the distribution of planet cards, with Polysium being the most popular and surprisingly equal with Roka. Roka hasn't really been a popular planet for the last couple of formats, so it's surprising to see so much of it here. I think this tournament has really proved that even despite all of the hits, Shios still now finally has enough playable creatures to warrant just using the planet card, and it is one of the strongest planet abilities in the entire game, if not the strongest. We also see no Syndion being played, which means Shape Knights were once again absent from a tournament. Shape Knights in my opinion have been and continue to be a very slept on deck. I was often finding myself as the only person playing Shape Knights for the majority of 2024, and actually took it all the way to second place at the 2024 Invitational. So I'm curious to see where the deck ends up in our next event, that of course being Alert Response. Beginning on April 5th, plenty of time to sign up and practice if you're interested. It is an asynchronous event, meaning that games are played over the course of a couple of weeks, giving players time to schedule their matches with each other rather than playing all in one day, so even if you've got a busy schedule, consider giving it a go. Players of all skill levels are of course welcome. Up next here, we're going to get into the top 4 highest placing players and decks from this event, starting with Green Butler's 4th place with his very unorthodox Value Omnius list. We tend to see a lot more unique strategies make higher placements early on in a format when players are not sure what decks need to be prepared for, and it looks like this event Butler has caught people off guard with a lack of answers to Omnius the Planet Abomination. High risk, high reward card being the highest stats in the game at a very steep star cost, but also no ability helping it survive other card abilities. Omnius has often not really been viewed as a viable threat in the metagame, with so many effect removal options and now this tournament with 2 Pelfam back in the format after the ban list, but Butler manages to put up an impressive performance with the list nonetheless, achieving his first ever top 4 placement in a tournament since beginning with the game in 2020. His 8th tournament manages to secure a nice accolade for himself going forward. I do want this series to offer some educational material for aspiring players, so I'll be breaking down everything I feel this deck does well, as well as the things I think it struggles with. I think the deck going forward will really struggle into the best decks because, as mentioned, they will likely be running 2 copies of Pelfam, making Omnius a huge drain on star economy. I also think that the inclusion of Double Wormhole in this list is very questionable, as games are not really going to last long enough to utilise the creatures shuffled back into the deck. And Double Wormhole sort of functions, in this list at least, like a much slower Abomination Tomb. I think this deck is playing effectively to its heavier economy side though, with card-consuming Cosmic Creator and Fraxel, as well as the Sindel Planet card, all leaning into the expensive Omnius, hopefully allowing multiple Omnius to come down on back-to-back turns and catch some opponents off guard. Cosmic Creator of course having solid synergy with the Skelly package, as well as Archean of Omnius. I think that whole theme of the deck comes together surprisingly okay, but I think going forward in the format, this deck will struggle very hard to see a top 4. Now for some card suggestions I think would work well in the list. First of all, always play 6 cards in your sideboards, guys. Butler chose to not bring a sideboard and his deck suffers for it. Having the flexibility to pivot into counter cards in games 2 and 3 is a major advantage against certain matchups. For those who don't know, before games 2 and 3, you can exchange any cards from your main galaxy with cards in your sideboard in order to slightly change up your deck list for certain matchups. I think this deck could benefit from including a copy or 2 of Time Flash Portal, a really flexible card opening up a lot of damaging options while having some defensive flexibility. That offensive removal potency just seems to be a little lacking here. I would also be thinking about Super Bouncy Trampoline to again help prevent susceptibility to Pelfam, but also Jakra of the Blue Flame Jar, which I think we should expect to see an uptick in popularity as a splash inclusion into a lot of strategies going forward. I also think that with the whole 10-star Omnius high end here, you may be able to get away with running a copy of Warpole Jetpack, to further lead into that back-to-back Omnius potency. Moving on to our third place competitor this event, we have Harry Knight on this big Tekla list. Now I do want to say that the win rate might look a little alarming, but this is due to having to play extra games in the double elimination top cut bracket, going 2-1 when winning, but 0-2 when losing, so just unfortunate visually, but statistically, Harry Knight has managed to secure his first top 3 on his favourite planet, and one that is often regarded as the weakest planet in the game. He manages to not only earn his second top 4 in just 4 tournament entries, meaning a 50% top rate, but he also does so with the weakest planet in the game. It's just really impressive stuff. This deck of course utilizing Tekla's ability to gain access to the guaranteed Enderman's Telescope, a really strong tool if you're able to know what you're drawing with it, and a really high star cost set of creatures to maximize the stars gained. This deck is running the Paliforce package, alongside the typical Tekla core, to be able to run the newly unlimited Warpole Jetpack, playing off of the Great Serpent of the Falls and Talakon. And these two packages do seem to fit quite nicely together. One of Tekla's biggest weaknesses of course being that it is the most recent planet added to the game, and therefore has the fewest options available to it. The Paliforce package really helps fill out the deck list here, and yeah, it just looks overall pretty solid for a first tournament of the format. I do have to put my meta cap on here for a minute though and say, like I touched on, I do think we're going to see a further shift into hyper damage focused lists with Jakra, Time Flash Portal and Pelfam that can just rip through defenses and deal a ton of damage on back-to-back turns, making the higher costed creatures somewhat of a liability, as you're taking longer to get them out and they aren't sticking around for very long. There's also still Gla running around in the format, Flooper combos, the staple options. There's just too much for one Leviathan Crown, or even 2 for that matter, to stand up to. Again, have to include those 6 cards in your sideboard, they help so much. If you don't know which ones to run, just ask around the server. I'm sure someone's got your back. I think I would replace Leviathan Crown for a copy of Super Bouncy Trampoline, as it's higher impact against Jakra, Super Flooper plus a combo piece, and Pelfam. Other than that, I think this deck is getting about as good as it can be without some major shifts into being a completely different deck. Congrats again to Harry Knight on his first top 3 and a nice €25 prize to go along with it. Coming in at second place, we have my own deck list, that being a Skelligast list utilizing the Jakra package. I was unsure on the strength of zone removal options so early in the format, so I opted to run Gusta plus Forces of Justice to test it out as a side package. I think now just running Bone Ladder and using different tools is a little bit better than Gusta in this particular list. I think apart from that, this list is pretty standard. I do think that if Ghast-centric strategies want to keep up in this format, they'll have to run a Blue Flame package. I also opted to run Abandonment in the main deck here. I was expecting a lot of out-of-planet Thorngaborks, Gustas, Zamazeds, things like this, that I could hopefully punish with Abandonment. I think a second copy of Bondbeak would have been better than I gave it credit for initially. I think running just one was a mistake. I did like the Universe Boundary in this list though. Going -1 feels bad, but not as bad as missing Jakra or Queen all game, and this helps with consistency. Overall, have to be happy with it though, winning €50 for second place. Keeping it brief and heading straight into the next one, the winner of Aringrey's Arena, taking home the first tournament win of 2025 and being the first player invited to this year's Invitational in December, Secret27 gets first place with this Chios Tempo list. Secret27 is the undisputed king of Chaos Galaxy, with some absolutely insane statistics. The most consistent player we've ever seen, winning the SBR season in both 2023 and 2024, more tournament wins than any other player in history by a landslide. For all you aspiring players out there, this is the man to beat. And we see him put on an absolute clinic of a performance this tournament, going 10-2, which is pretty insane. He was able to dominate with this Chios Tempo list, which seems to set a solid baseline power level for decks in this format going forward. This deck has Chios' insane draw power to just churn through all of your damage and removal. Jakra, Pelfam, Time Flash Portal is just a never-ending onslaught of damage once this deck gets rolling. And a little sneaky side package of Gusta, Orbit, and Forces of Justice to really put some drain onto the opponent as they're trying to set up. Just keeping control of the flow of the game and not allowing the opponent to go all in on their win condition right away. After having played this deck list a bit myself, I would say the Forces of Justice idea here is actually a really cool flexibility option. I think it's easy to get caught up going for Gusta, but Zamazeds and Scoria carriers are probably just as valuable. Even Thorngabork makes sense to go for some of the time. making the card not as potent as on first inspection, but still very flexible and great utility. Orbit also looks like it would be a really potent and dangerous effect, but as people become more and more aware of it and play around it, it properly levels out as just an okay card. It's probably the most cuttable card in this list, aside from maybe Erratic Void, which could also easily become another tech/utility option like Monument to Creation or Super Bouncy Trampoline. One final congratulations to Secret27, taking home the big money prize of €100 and an invitational 2025 invite. Now before we get into our card statistics for this tournament, I want to take some time to tell you a story. A story of two knights. We talked before about Harry Knight, who bravely took on the new ban list metagame with his favourite planet and managed to achieve his highest placement ever. But it wasn't easy. Standing in his way was his greatest rival, Chrono Knight. These two, both being knights, have been compared by many in every aspect, and yet in a lot of ways are almost opposites. Chrono Knight has had many tournament appearances over the last 2 years, achieving multiple second places, but has always been longing for that coveted first place win. However, Harry Knight, despite his longevity with the game, has only participated in 4 tournaments, but achieved a top 4 placement at half of them. And finally, here, at this tournament, they were ready to face each other head-on. And fate would just so have it that they would be placed into the same starting group. These two battled it out and fought hard among their group until the final round, where it was Chrono Knight versus Harry Knight. Chrono Knight was 1-1. He'd need a win here to secure a position in the final bracket. Harry Knight was 2-0. A victory for him meant crushing Chrono Knight's dreams. They fought hard against one another, trading blows, but ultimately, Chrono Knight 2-0 swept Harry Knight, proving his superiority and allowing them to now both advance to the final stage. They would have to face again. And when that time finally came the next day in the second stage of the tournament, the time for their rivalry to finally come to a conclusion, Harry Knight stood proud, ready to take on whatever Chrono Knight had to throw at him. But as the bracket stage began, Chrono Knight was nowhere to be found. He had vanished from the tournament, leaving Harry Knight with a free advance to the next round, but also the crushing weight of never knowing if he would have won. Ultimately, Harry Knight would take this advantage with him all the way to his 3rd placement. And Chrono Knight has once again been unable to climb to that pinnacle of 1st place. Chrono Knight is a player who, like I said, has been chasing the 1st place for the last 2 years, and all eyes are on him this year as we see if he can finally pull it off. As a nice consolation prize though, he did manage to win Most Creative Deck at Aringrey's Arena for a nice €25. So I wanted to highlight Chrono Knight here as someone who did win a prize for the event, but also as a player with a lot of eyes on him right now. To wrap up this video, we're going to take a look at the usage and win rate statistics for this tournament, and talk a little bit about where we can expect the meta to shift in alert response. First, we can see here all of the staple cards and some of the other cards this tournament with the highest play rates. We see the Planetary Field and For Sale sign, although commonly agreed among the community that they are staples in every deck, see a slight bit of underplay this event, being only in 82% of decks rather than 100. Now I've placed Pelfam here too, though I don't necessarily think every deck in the game should run him at max copies. It is interesting to see more Pelfam being played than even Field and Sale sign. Looking at our highest play rate cards now, the community has been very back and forth on whether to call this card a staple. Zamazed sees an 82% usage rate this event, very much pushing it into that pseudo-staple to staple range. Rilla Hex Mine getting a lot of play as well at 55%, Fraxel sees a surprisingly high win rate at 60% for just 50% usage. Conversely, Warpole Jetpack seeing a particularly low win rate of just 37% despite being in 50% of decks. Likely the unbanning of Warpole Jetpack has baited a few people into trying to get it to fit where it maybe doesn't, and also it will likely take some time before Polysium finds the right list and settles properly into the metagame. We see Super Bouncy Trampoline at quite high usage for a tech card, Gusta making a nice win rate for itself at 60% over 45% usage, Abomination Tomb, pretty standard card, played across a decent number of decks at 36% usage, and having a middling win rate of 46%. And a really big standout for this tournament, and something to take note of I would say, is Time Flash Portal,
at a substantial 36% usage rate, rocking a 64% win rate, likely highlighting the difference between decks that can deal a lot of damage versus ones that can't. I think Time Flash Portal is going to be a very standout card across this entire format. Moving down the line, we can see here now the usage and win rates for the primary archetypal packages that see a lot of splash into other decks. Blue Flames see an astronomical win rate of 71% at a respectable 27% usage. This is likely inflated by the two highest placing decks being primarily centered around using this package. However, it's still a testament to the fact that the winning decks of this tournament were making use of the package. Moving on to the Pally-Falls package, a shockingly low win rate at 33% over 36% usage. Quite alarming indeed. I would say that this is probably a result of variance in a tournament where a lot of rounds were decided by no-shows, so the statistics could be slightly skewed there, in the sense that Palysium players didn't get to play a lot of their winning matchups, but it'll be good to see how these statistics change up going into alert response. And finally here, the Glug package saw absolutely zero play this tournament. This has been a very popular package in pretty much any deck that can run the Gaios planet, and as we saw previously in the planet chart, no Gaios actually came to this tournament. I think we can expect to see a fair bit more of this package going forward. And finally, we can see here the win and usage statistics for popular sideboard options. Now these statistics should be taken with a grain of salt because these are just the win and use rates for these cards in general, meaning it shows win and usage across the main deck and sideboard, and doesn't necessarily show the win rates of only games where the sideboard cards were used. Really, I think the best takeaway from these stats are just the usage rates. We can see just how much people are teching against certain strategies. That's going to wrap up everything for this video. Huge shout out to everyone who participated, and I urge anyone who wants to give this game a try to join the Discord via the link in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the new tournament and around the Discord server. Until next time.